Hi, my name is Lynn Barnhouse, and for my kitchen science midterm today, I'm going to be making chocolate zucchini cake. So before we get started, I thought I would just outline all the ingredients we are going to be using today, because as everyone knows, baking is a science, and each ingredient chosen and each amount of the ingredient is not arbitrary, and each has a scientific role in the recipe. So here they are. As you can see, this is the workspace that I'm going to be using to make my chocolate zucchini cake today. So it's just my personal preference to have all of my ingredients out beforehand. So this just allows me to stay in one place and I don't have to open all the cabinets and the refrigerator to get out the ingredients and possibly contaminate my hands. And this just makes life a lot easier as well. And I ensured that my workspace was clean as I use a disinfectant, and I just did a couple of wipe downs to make sure that any bacteria that may have been on the counter was gone. And I also rinsed my zucchini with soap and water, and I just put them in a bowl so that they're not rolling around and possibly touching something that may be contaminated. After washing my hands again, I removed the end of the zucchini, and besides this, we're going to utilize the whole zucchini. But we do not want chunks of it, as really its main role is to provide moisture to the bread, so we're going to grate it as fine as we can using this grater. So I set my zucchini aside, and now I combined 1.5 cups of sugar, 1/2 cup of vegetable oil, and 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. So it's imperative that these are all combined at the same time because they each have a specific role and interact with each other. So the oil in this recipe is going to serve as a lipid. So all lipids are shortening agents that prevent disulfide bonds from forming in the gluten, which is going to weaken the overall bond. And gluten is glutenin and gliadin, and they connect to form gluten. So lipids kind of squeeze in between to prevent these bonds, which is going to lead to less overall gluten, which is good because since this is a cake, we do not want a very dense, rigid protein gluten filled product. So it's going to become very light and airy, which is what we want. And the sugar is actually very important as well in this stage because if you think about when you're making cookies, you always cream together the butter, which is a lipid, and the sugar. And I always thought that this is just to ensure that these two ingredients were very evenly dispersed within the recipe, but it's actually much deeper than that because in baking, sugar is going to help promote lightness by incorporating air into the shortening. Because if you think about the nature of sugar, it's a crystal, so then even when it's surrounded by this lipid, there are going to be like little air pockets that the shortening wasn't able to seep into. So during baking, these aerosols are going to expand when filled with carbon dioxide and other gases from the baking soda, so it's going to give them a place to go, so all these little air pockets are going to lead to a very airy bread. And these gluten strands are highly elastic and allow the batter to stretch under the expansion of gases. But if too much gluten is going to develop, the batter is going to become rigid, as I referred to earlier. So sugar is actually going to compete with the gluten-forming proteins for the water. Because if you think about sugar and water, if you combine them, sugar is going to kind of soak it up because it absorbs it. So the gluten and the water are going to be, the gluten and the sugar are going to be competing for the water. So because the gluten's not going to get all the water at once, there's not going to be full hydration of these proteins during mixing. So less gluten is going to be allowed to develop, preventing the elastic dough from becoming too rigid. So with the correct proportion of sugar in this recipe, the gluten is going to maintain optimum elasticity for the gases to be held. And the gases are going to be held partly due to vanilla's role, because vanilla is an acidic agent that's going to react with the baking soda. So this reaction is going to form carbon dioxide, which causes the airiness within the bread. Because without an acidic agent, baking soda would literally just sit there because it has no one to act with and create the carbon dioxide. So it also smells terrific and has a role in the flavor of the cake, but it is much deeper than just a great smelling ingredient. So in this bowl, I've just combined 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 1/2 cup of cocoa powder, 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, and 1 teaspoon of salt. So each of these dry ingredients is very important, and all-purpose flour is probably the most widely used flour. And the differences between each kind of flour is dependent upon the different kind of wheats that they come from, which is going to alter the amount of protein, which is going to directly impact the gluten formation. So wheat flour has gluten and gliadin that's going to change shape in the presence of water, as I talked about earlier, forming gluten. So it's going to trap the air formed from the leavening, and you can kind of think of it as a balloon. The stronger it is, the more gas it can hold. So without gluten, there'd be nothing to hold the gas. But in bread flour, there's going to be 14 to 16% protein. So there's going to be a lot of protein, so it's going to be very dense and very chewy because this protein is going to lead to more gluten, which means more structure. All-purpose flour is 10 to 12% protein, pastry flour is 9%, cake flour is 7 to 8%, and although this is a cake, it's more of a dense bread, so that's why we're using all-purpose flour versus the very delicate nature of a cake flour. And salt is added because salt's going to absorb some of the moisture of the dough and tighten the gluten. And it's also preservative because once baked, it's going to absorb moisture. And it's very important in bread making because it strengthens the gluten, allowing it to hold more water and carbon dioxide, thus stretching more. And cocoa powder. Cocoa powder is the powder that's left over when you remove cocoa butter from chocolate liquor. And the difference between natural, which is what I used, and Dutch is because this is actually acidic versus the Dutch goes through an alkalizing process and neutralizes it. So the Dutch is going to have less of a bitter taste and it's going to be not going to be acidic. So this is actually good because it's going to react with the baking soda and produce CO2 and obviously lead to the chocolate nature of the bread. And baking soda is very important in this as well. It's going to react with this cocoa because it's sodium bicarbonate, and with an acid it's going to produce carbon dioxide. So it's going to introduce air into the batter. It's going to be the leavening agent of this recipe, and without it there'd be no cake equality as the gluten potential is gone with no air to fill the potential balloon. At this point I'm going to combine my flour mixture into my sugar mixture and stir it. Then going to add my zucchini. So here's the final product, and I coated the pan with vegetable oil cooking spray to prevent adherence from the batter to the pan. And it's important when using leavening agent to get it in the oven as quickly as possible to optimize the flow of the reaction. While keeping your ingredients out of the temperature danger zone and using the ingredients appropriately on a disinfected workspace, you too can make chocolate zucchini cake.